All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good to see you all. Welcome to the April 2024 Central Oregon Writers Guild monthly meeting. We have some, if you're on our mailing list, you got an email yesterday announcing the anthology. Most of the information for the anthology is on our website. We are taking submissions. Jean, Harkin, where are you? Jean is our first submission. Yeah. Yeah, we got one in yesterday. So yeah, feel free to submit away. Any questions, email us at either the anthology email, which is on there, or the Central Oregon Writers Guild at Gmail email. Looking forward to another exciting full anthology this year. So we're taking poetry, fiction, nonfiction. We had tons of submissions last year, so we decided that we were only going to publish one thing per person. This year, you can submit to poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. If it gets to the point where we're full, we're going to probably ask you to pick which one of those you're going to want to. But feel free to submit, and submit your best stuff, submit your polished stuff, and submit it in the right format. Yeah, we're looking forward to reading all your work. What else? Let's see. So as you are aware, our website, we're looking at the website, right? Am I scrolling in? Okay. Okay, so the website lists upcoming events. There's Kerry. How do you say your last name? Chaput. Chaput. Okay. She's going to talk to us tonight. And those of you who are at home watching, if you notice below Kerry's picture there's a little link that is the slides that she's going to go over. Those of you who are here, when you get home, feel free to download those if you want. I may change it around and put that down below, but we'll keep the slides on the website. Next month, we've got Shelby Little. Talk to us a little bit about how we market ourselves. She's a great writer as well. And then in June, Julie and Eric are going to talk about building your author platform. Our June workshop will be with Julie Swearingen, and we will actually build an author website in that workshop. So you will bring your laptop to that workshop, and by the time you leave, you will have an author website. Okay. So that's the plan for that one. You'll notice that the price for that one's a little bit higher. That's because we got to pay our person to do that work for you. Michael Stephen Gregory is going to talk to us about writers' conferences. Looks like we've got a writers' conference coming to Central Oregon. Not sure if it's going to be this fall or next spring, but I'll keep you posted the more I hear about that. Okay. And on and on. Lauren in August, beautiful Irene Cooper in September, also doing a workshop, and you can sign up for that now too. And then Kristen Dorsey is going to join us in October. We're waiting to kind of hear who's coming for the November MFA program this year, and we're going to try and get someone in from the OSU MFA program to talk to us in November. And then our holiday potluck. On the right side are all the events that we have in Central Oregon that we know of. And again, if anyone knows of something that's not on here, please email us at Central Oregon Writers Guild at gmail.com, and we'll put it on here. But there are links to most of these things. If you just click on the purple, you'll end up at the website for all the stuff that's going on here. There's authors readings, there's workshops, there's open mics, all kinds of stuff going on. So feel free oops.
Does it say what time the open mic night is on Thursday?
6 o'clock. What did I just do? I just closed. So now look at the pretty blue squirrels. Okay, so anybody have any announcements, anything that they would like to share? Yeah.
Last month, a lady, I'm sorry, I don't know who you were here, got this book yet. And she said, thank you. I have loved this book. I bought myself a copy. But I did bring this book back to share with the next person. It's poetry written by a Native American poet. She doesn't use much Native language, so you're good there. I recognized it from the song's language. But who's next to read this book? It's well worth it.
All right, we got book sharing going on. That's great. All right.
Awesome.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Saturday, June 22nd, at right here, put on by the library in this room. A poet is coming from Portland. His name is Larry Beckett, and he's been writing since the 60s. And he wrote songs for musicians back then. And he has some amazing new books coming out, and he's going to be reading that right here by the library.
Is that through the Right Here program?
Yes, June 26th.
Yeah. So I'll put that on when I get around to the June, I'll put that on, I'll announce that on the June calendar as well. Great. Yes.
So my friend and author Megan Crane and I are creating a Southern Oregon, Central Oregon Romance Writers of America chapter. And we know that quite a few people have left Romance Writers of America, but we're trying to do a new together and, do some Zoom, but also in person for people in Southern Oregon and people in Central Oregon. So we're kind of just doing that right now. If you're interested in being part of our chapter, let me know.
All right. So we'll hopefully have some time after to mingle and eat snacks and all that sort of stuff. Check in your romance writer and want to be part of that. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm teaching how to write and illustrate and publish a kids book workshop at COCC at the beginning of May. So the 4th and 11th is a 2-day kind of intensive workshop. So it'll be 4 hours per Saturday. So it's hopefully easy for those with, jobs and kids and all things, which I'm with you in solidarity.
So that's on our website. So Danny's, what day does that start?
The 4th, May 4th.
May 4th. So if you go to our website and you go in down on those little, on the right side, May 4th, COCC, workshop with Danny Nicholas there. Anybody else? Nope. Okay. Then I'm going to let Mary Krakow, our featured reader coordinator, introduce our featured readers. So come on up, Mary. Yay, Mary.
Thank you. So each month we have a featured reader. One of our members come up and read for a short time, something they've written. And the idea is we want everybody to get used to reading in front of the group, because one of these days you're going to have something published and you're going to be on book tour, right? Okay. So anyway, tonight's featured reader is Nora Taylor. She is a junior at Redmond Proficiency Academy. Amidst the homework and college prep chaos, however, Nora always finds the time to pursue her literary passions. Her work nestles itself between the whimsical and macabre, and she is currently in the trenches of a novel rewrite. Please welcome Nora Taylor.
Thank you. Okay. So this is the first chapter or little prologue bit of a new, I guess, short novel that I started writing. It's actually inspired by some dreams I've been having. I don't know. I'm a person who lucid dreams a lot. I know I'm dreaming while I'm asleep. So I tend to use that a lot in my writing, but this is something kind of inspired by that. At night, there was a door in the wall. During the day, Ava could not see it, no matter how many times she traced her hands along the dark paneled library wall. No matter how many times she chipped her fingernails, prying at the edges of the dark mahogany. In the daylight, there was no door. But at night, oh, at night, long after she was meant to be in bed, Ava could hear them. She would sit up in her bed, clutching the eiderdown, and listen to them. The wall people. They spoke in a strange, muffled sort of language, squeaks and hisses that trickled under the crack of her door from the library down the hall. She knew it came from the library. She knew because Emery walked. Ever since they came to live in the townhouse, her little sister had become a somnambulist. Every night, Emery would walk, her little curly head lolling to and fro as she shuffled along in bare feet. Around and around, little Emery would go in restless, endless circles. Every night, it started approximately 2 minutes after the wall people began their routines, hissing and thumping behind the wainscot. Never out into the hall, though, until 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, everything had changed. Ava had lain, head pressed to her pillow as the darkness thickened and settled around the townhouse. As mother and father and finally the maid had all gone to bed, blowing out the candles and letting the dark creep in. And once the maid's squeaky springs had stopped their protesting, when at last the house lay in absolute quiet, Ava began counting. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20. On and on she counted, rhythmic inside her head, careful to match her pace to the faint ticking from the grandfather clock by the window, dreading that nightly number. 90. 90 seconds precisely. Sure enough, the whispering began. It was soft at first, little thumps and scrapings, then a hiss, a mumble, moving, clearly moving in the walls. Ava had sat up, as she always did, pressing her ear to the wall at the head of her bed, straining to make out the noises. They were faint, nearly imperceptible, but she could hear them nevertheless. And then Emery's sheets had rustled. Ava was used to the 5-year-old crawling out of bed, eyes shut, rosy mouth pursed, eyebrows creased in concentration as she began her nightly circuit. At first, Ava paid her sister little mind. But when she heard the click of the door latch, an icy fear wormed itself into her 12-year-old heart. Emery's hand was so small on the door latch, and Ava caught the door as it swung shut behind her little sister, peering out after her into the gloom. The hallway seemed to stretch for miles, and Ava fumbled for a match, a candle. When the light finally flared, Emery was already halfway down the hall, her bare feet silent on the dark, plush carpet, the vaulted ceiling vanishing into shadow above her. Ava had gulped, pressing herself as she hurried out of the imagined safety of the nursery to follow her sister. She had caught up to the small ghost-like figure at the cracked door to the library. Emery slipped through the gap before Ava could grab her hand, shake her awake. So instead, Ava found herself slipping quietly into the dark room behind her sister. Emery moved with unhurried purpose. Ava followed. The candlelight flared again, illuminating the intimidating stacks around them, the rows of dark wood shelves that seemed to stretch out into book-lined hallways of shadowy forever. But Emery seemed to know where she was going. Ava had read in a book once that somnambulists were possessed, that demons took hold of the night-goer's body and used them as puppets to perform nefarious deeds under cloak of darkness. Since Emery had started, Ava had kept quiet. Quiet in fear, because Rose Thatcher, the postmaster's daughter, had said that her cousin was a somnambulist, and that when her parents found out, they sent Rose's cousin to a sanitarium and that she had died there. Died from the croup, Rose Thatcher had said. But Rose Thatcher had also said, her blonde ringlets falling prettily around her cheeks, that her cousin had been cursed by the devil, and that when he found out that Rose's cousin had been caught, he had sent the sickness to smite her. So Ava had kept Emery's nighttime circles to herself. And now, as Emery moved between the stacks, her tiny hands hanging limply at her sides, Ava wondered queasily if the devil wanted to borrow a book. But Emery ignored the shelves, her shuffling steps leading them to the back of the library. Oil paintings of leering men in old-fashioned finery eyed them with hostility from their perches against the dark red wallpaper. Ava bit her lip to stop herself from crying. Instead, Emery made straight for a section of wall that Ava saw, with mounting horror, was not quite right. There was a tall, narrow rectangle of light on the wall, and as she watched her sister press a hand to the inside of the rectangle, Ava knew that it was a door. A flat, secret door in the wall, and Emery was going through it. Ava wished her feet would root to the spot. She wished her fear would override her sisterly instinct to follow, wished that she could run back to the dark nursery and hide under her eiderdown and wait till morning. But Emery was going into the wall, going in where the wall people whispered, and Ava found her feet following. The rectangle pushed inwards, a stream of dim light shining into the library as Emery's little hands pushed the wall door ajar. Ava followed her through into the wall.
Wow.
That was fantastic. Really, really well read, really well delivered too. Make sure you do your own audiobooks. Excellent tension, excellent. I mean, that's the a case study in rising action there, right? Pacing and tension, really, really well done. Our presenter this evening is Kerry Chaput. History with a side of action, how to write historical fiction that keeps readers hooked. Kerry I've known Kerry for a long time, and it's been a joy for me to watch her writing develop. There was an old Saturday Night Live, like a short little piece where they showed hands on a keyboard, on a typewriter keyboard, and they were just typing away, and then the caption underneath it was Stephen King has writer's block. typing away, and then they stop for about 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Right? And then just keep going. Right?
Yeah.
Kerry puts Stephen King to shame. She's working on your 8th novel right now?
I just completed my night.
Just
Oh,
completed
wow.
her novel. Yeah, right. And that's been in the last 2 or 3 years, right?
6.
6.
Yeah.
Kerry is a best-selling historical fiction author who has been featured on Jane Friedman's blog and Mother magazine. Born and raised in California, she now lives in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, where she can be found on hiking trails and in coffee shops. You can connect with her at www.kerrywrites.com. Big hand for Kerry.
Very professional with the clicker. All right, hi everyone. So as Mike said, we've known each other for a while. I actually, the book that first got published, Mike read an early version of it. Very brave soul for taking that on. So it's fun to still be involved in this writers group. So okay, so I'm Kerry Chaput. I'm a historical fiction author, and I write historical adventure, so really pretty high action historical fiction books. So that's going to be my focus tonight, is going to be talking about how to hook readers and keep them reading with the principles of action. But I think some of the stuff that I'll be going over tonight in regards to craft, you can really apply to practically any genre of fiction. Okay, so this is the overview. I'm going to give you just a quick introduction and background about me. We're going to talk about what is historical fiction. It's actually a lot of different subgenres underneath that. We are going to talk about why do we care about historical fiction? Why do we want to write it? Why do we want to read it? And we're going to talk about active protagonists, which is, again, you can apply to any genre. And then we are going to be putting it into practice with a little writing exercise. Okay, so. Oh, that's okay. I'm glad someone is dealing with that because I'm not techie. We should. It's moving. Wait. Thinking about it. Okay, I think we're good there. Okay, so I have published 6 books, both indie and traditional titles. I say my brand is basically historical fiction with attitude, because I write, like I said, a lot of action adventure. So put in one sentence, I write historical action adventure for women featuring found family, first love, and a touch of magic. My day job is I have a master's and doctorate degree in physical therapy, which kind of explains what my fascination is with movement and action and adventure. These are my books, if I can get this, there we go. These are my books and some of the awards that I've won. Up at the top is my young adult historical titled Chasing Eleanor, and that's actually set in Bend in 1935. And then at the bottom is my historical fiction trilogy called the Defying the Crown series. And that is the 3rd book just published 2 weeks ago. And that is set in 17th century France and colonial Canada. And then, yeah, so on the right, those are some of the independent publisher awards that won.
Which was the one set in Ben?
Chasing Eleanor. Yes. Okay. All right, so the main message that I have for you today, is what everything I'm going to talk about is going to boil down to this. The goal is not to be a historian, but the goal is to be a storyteller. And that is where a lot of people that write historical fiction can go wrong, because we get very into the history. But really it's all about keeping to the principles of storytelling. So let's talk about what is historical fiction. And really there's lots of different definitions, but we go by the Historical Novel Society's definition, which is anything 50 years or more in the past. And for those of you that are doing the math, that's 1974 is historical fiction, which seems insane.
Most of us are like, no.
I know, I know.
Because
Yeah, that was just.
we're like middle
I know.
school. Like, wait.
And there even some even say the 1980s is historical fiction. I can't get on board with that. So yeah. So it's a story that takes readers to a different place in time, at least 50 years in the past. It's known for its immersive setting. When you're reading historical fiction, you want to be completely transported. You want to go back in time and you want to just be in that setting. You can use real or fictional characters, but it's against the backdrop of history. The idea is really to escape to another place in time. All these different subgenres are still part of historical fiction. We have biographical, which would be an example like Philippa Gregory and her Tudor books. Alternate history is in the vein of Man in the High Castle, history how it could have been, or reimagined. Dual timelines, so you can still have a modern storyline, historical storyline, and it's still considered historical fiction. We have epics like Ken Follett, Pillars of the Earth. We have historical fantasy like Outlander. And we have historical adventure, which, like I said, is sort of my niche. And if anyone reads any modern historical fiction, Kate Quinn is an amazing example of historical adventure. So why do we write it? Why do we care about it? And we write it here because it opens a portal. We get to go back in time. Literally, we get to immerse ourselves in a certain place in time and understand people in a way that is deeper than just learning necessarily like a textbook about them. It teaches things about our world we didn't know. An example is my favorite author is Ruta Sepetys, and she wrote a book called Salt to the Sea, which I highly recommend. And that book details the worst maritime disaster in history, which I had never heard of before I read this book. And it was, actually I have it down here. It was at the end of World War II, and 9,400 people died. And it was a ship that was escaping the Soviet army, fleeing Germany. And so it's introducing you to these amazing, incredible stories that sometimes have slipped our education. It offers empathy and perspective to history, or as I like to call history, an opinion piece. Because really, we know nothing. Let's be real about that, okay? What we have been taught and what we have learned in school is a tiny, tiny portion of what history truly is, and it's one perspective, usually from the white man. There are incredible stories out there of women, people of color, and diverse backgrounds that have not been told. And so historical fiction really allows us to dig deep into some of those stories. And that goes along with, it empowers people because you see people like you represented. I do read pretty widely in historical fiction, but I'm very drawn to women's stories, especially powerful women who thrived against all of the limits of the patriarchy and what was happening at the time. So let's talk a little bit about how we write historical fiction. This is more from why we write it. So a couple of my author friends offered up why they write historical fiction. So a few of these are really great answers. One fell in love with Botticelli's paintings, and now that's all she writes about Botticelli's paintings. Wendy says, I love stories of resilience. That is totally right up my alley. To shine light on eras that people don't remember. The past gives us context, and it's like traveling to a foreign country. I love all those answers. And then you might be wondering why I write historical fiction, but I'm going to save that answer for the end because we have a little bit of learning to do first. And I think we should get to know each other a little bit before I overshare. All right, so how do we write it? Let's talk craft a little bit. So we obviously need to set the time and the place. The funnest part for me is when I'm kind of coming up with a story. Time and place is really the exciting part. Even what calls to me? What part of history is something that I just need to know more about? I need to read about. And then you dive into it. You just sort of start researching and you immerse yourself in the stories of that time. And research is really where historical fiction takes off, and it's also where we go wrong. Because historical fiction authors across the board will tell you we live in research, and you go down the rabbit hole of the most ridiculous things. You can spend hours reading about how they made candles, and you're like, it's not even in my book. Stop reading about that. So research is imperative. You have to know when to use it, how to use it, and really how to sprinkle it into your manuscript. I always talk about research on two levels. It really should be done wide and narrow and big and small. What I mean by that is my historical fiction trilogy set in mid and late 1600s is based on a true story that I found on my husband's ancestry search. I could not write that story until I understood the bigger things happening in France at the time. And there was a lot. When we talk about the wars of religion and the Catholic king, and he was trying to force conversion of Protestants. There were so many political and religious issues happening. I had to understand it before I could write it. And of course I didn't listen to that. So I started writing it and missed a whole bunch, and I had to go back and revise because he didn't take the time to like really read the big political picture. And then the small moments, that's where the magic is, okay? It's important to know all of the big picture items. But the small details are just, oh, they're so good. That's what makes the story fly off the page, are the little human details. You have primary and secondary sources, primary being someone that was alive at the time speaking about what happened. And secondary is frequently like an academic after the fact who has done research about the situation at the time. You want both if you can manage it, okay? Because as you can imagine, as we go along in time and we learn more, we often understand that time a little bit better in past perspective than we necessarily do in the minute. Primary sources are hard the older you get. Me writing in the 17th century, it was hard, it was not impossible. I did find documents that had survived. I was writing about the true story of the French orphans that settled Canada, and they did it in a version of 17th century speed dating, true story. I actually found a marriage document that was still intact from the time. So I could see exactly like how many ox they got, and it was pretty cool. You get online databases with like JSTOR for scholarly journals. I don't live there a lot, I'll be honest. It's very dry and I kind of lose the excitement about storytelling. So I use it as much as I have to. And the rest of the time I'm in like ancestry searches, periodicals, articles and whatnot. Memoirs are my absolute favorite source. The book that I talked about that's set in Ben, Chasing Eleanor, I found a memoir book that was a collection of stories of young people that grew up in the Great Depression riding the rails. And they were in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s, recounting what life was like at 12, jumping on the train and traveling across the country. And the details were like, it was just so rich and textured. I had so much to work with there, because you can read about the Great Depression in textbooks and you can hear about all these things, but when you read about someone on the train and the sparks flying in their face and how they counted the bolts to make sure that it was slow enough to get on, those are the details you want. That's what brings your historical fiction to life. Published nonfiction is great. I just ordered one today for my next project. I always love diving into experts in their field who are writing about your subject matter. So you really want to then, once you have your research, take your character and define that character and situate them in this world that you are now starting to create. There's a delay on this.
Maybe aim it right at the laptop.
Oh, it's a laptop. I'll show that next time. Okay. This is one of my favorite pieces of information for you because it changed the way that I write and the speed at which I write. You can use this for any genre. How do we create our character in a way that we can really jump into a story and write it and not go off the rails? I answer these 5 questions about a character before I start. And it's taken me about 6, 7, 8-ish books to realize that I need to have these answered before I write. First question, who are they? Just name, a descriptor, age, something simple. What do they want? They have to have an external goal. This is something very immediate, something very tangible. To use my Chasing Eleanor book as an example, my main character is 17-year-old orphan Magnolia. That's who she is. What does she want? She wants to bring her brothers home because they are at an unknown orphan asylum. Okay, it's very external. The story and the plot of the book is following her trying to get her brothers and bring them back home. Okay, that's her external one. Their motivation, what is this internal need that drives them to make this external goal happen? And in my story, it's to prove that she can keep her family together and to prove that she can kind of soothe her own wounds from the family trauma during the Great Depression. What stands in their way? Great Depression, the answer is right there. Poverty, she's orphaned, she's under 18, she can't keep her brothers. So what stands in their way, that helps you craft the story. Because you think, okay, what's the one thing they want so much? Why do they want it? What's their motivation? And what can I put in their way that is realistic for the times, where your research comes in? When you read about the Great Depression, you know the financial issues of the time, you know, the cultural issues of the time, it's pretty easy to start coming up with ideas for things that can stand in their way. And then number 5 is, what is their misbelief about the world? This is very important, and it is something that we miss a lot. If anyone has read Story Genius, that was probably the main take home I took home from that craft book, was they have to have a misbelief, and that should be driving their story. So in my Great Depression book, her misbelief is really that if she can put her family back together, she will be worthy of love. That's the misbelief, is that she needs to do this to prove her worth in the world. And then the misbelief drives that story. And hopefully by the end, they understand that this misbelief is a flawed outlook on the world. And, you know, I feel like we've all done this in life, where we've come to a realization and said, it's not working for me. I need to reevaluate here. So, same rules in fiction. Okay, let's talk about world building. It is not just for fantasy. World building is so important in historical fiction. I like to think of it as the secondary main character. It's that important. It is present, ever present, and you need to put as much work into it as you do with characters. It's so important that historical fiction, along with fantasy, actually has higher word counts because we put in so much more into world building. So the big question is, how does your character interact with the environment? Okay, the world building, again, can go over the top real quick, okay? Building a world is not necessarily about putting more information in. It's about selecting the important details and making every detail hit and land, okay? So your character, depending on who they are and their worldview, that's going to determine what your world building will look like, okay? So everything comes back to character. Again, storytelling. We're not trying to be historians here. We're not trying to recreate the 17th century. We're trying to tell this one story of one person living in the 17th century, okay? Bring it back home to the character every time. In my opinion, the best plots drop the protagonist in a world that forces them to change, okay? Someone who's, you know, like my character who wants to go across the country and save her family and put her brothers back to home. She's living in the Great Depression. She has no money. She has no access. This is the kind of world that forces you to change. And I actually think the Great Depression is my favorite time period to read about for that reason right there. Because when you strip away money, when you strip away security, jobs, homes, everything, who are you? And I love examining that question. And so thinking about how does your world challenge your character in every way. The great example of this is World War II stories. There's a reason they still dominate the genre, and it's because can you imagine higher stakes anywhere? It's questioning your physical safety, your emotional safety. You have to choose between hurting another human or possibly having your family hurt. Those are the highest stakes imaginable, right? It determines who you are as a human being and how far you're willing to go for the people that you love. That's, I think, why World War II stories are just so powerful and so present in the historical fiction world. So the main question is you want the reader to ask the question, what would I do in this situation? You can have them question that. That's success in historical fiction writing. Okay, so we talked about how world building is really your secondary main character. You have to immerse your readers completely in it, not by more, but by specific details. You have to set the stage instantly from page one. We're going to show some examples here in just a few minutes. Everything needs to come down to your character, right? Don't go big. It's the mistake. You don't need to. Go with your character and how they see the world and how, you know, how Mike and I walk into a room, we're going to notice different things, right? We're going to feel different things because we're different people. Same rules apply for world building. I like these rules. I just made them up. Keep it human, keep it moving, and keep it relevant. Human details, most important. Have you heard that? I don't know where I read this, but basically, if you're talking about a war scene and the worst human tragedy you could possibly imagine, focus on the red sock and the gravel. That's the best thing you can do, and you don't need to make it big. Make it small, make it personal, because you're like, who's the human who lost that tiny red sock? It becomes meaningful. It's not just a thing that is on the page. Keep it moving. I'll tell you, static scenery is the pits. Like, don't, it's really hard, but don't do it. And static scenery is really like the walls were wrapped in paper, right? Or the candle flickered. It's like, we don't need that. It's not telling us anything. It's not giving us emotion. Make your character move through the scenery so that it actually comes alive. And then you can take that candle and talk about it. You have the character, I've actually done this in the book, have them dip their finger in the wax and let it dry and then peel it off. She was nervous. She didn't want to be talking to whoever she was talking to. Make it move with the character. Keeping it relevant, okay, relevant for the time and the character and the things that they want and the goal that they have, the motivation that drives them for that goal. Setting should really be working for you. Setting the world building should be doing double and triple duty. Scenes should not just be scenes. Setting should not just be setting. It should be revealing more about character every time. Okay, let's do a writing exercise. We are going to talk about 1950s living room. I don't know why I chose that. I just thought everyone kind of instantly has a feeling about what that looks like. So imagine just your average middle America, tract home in the 1950s. What comes to mind? Just anyone can say whatever comes to their mind. Anything that you might find in that living room.
Braided rug.
What is it?
A braided rug.
Yes, exactly. What else?
Pointy wooden legs on the sofa.
Yes,
Huge TV.
huge TV with like was it two stations? Yeah. Buddy had 3 stations, yeah, okay. I think of an ashtray, yeah.
Vinyl covering on the sofa.
Oh yeah, that's a classic, good one.
Grandma Moses.
Oh, I don't know what those are, but they sound very 50s. Yes, good one, okay. So far, nothing that anyone's saying is really out of the ordinary, like it kind of fits with the things that we think about. The reason I say that is because you don't need to fill in the basic details, we already know them. All you have to say is 1950s living room, and the majority of us will have a feel instantly. Even though we'll see different things, the big main details of that room, you don't need to put in your scene, okay? But now, let's talk about the family inside that living room, okay? I want you to choose someone from a family. It could be father, mother, sister, dog, fish, I don't care. Choose a character in your head. I want you to think about that character and think about sitting in that room as that character, okay? Think about your person before you think about the room. I want you to think about how they feel sitting in that room. I want you to think about what do they want out of life? What struggles do they have? What deep burning desire do they have? What deep sadness are they carrying? Even if you're just sitting in a living room, you have all these emotions for whatever's happening in your life. What do they struggle with? So think about these things for a minute, and then I want you to try to describe that living room from that perspective of the character that you chose, okay? We'll just give it a minute if you want to write or think about it, and then maybe 1 or 2 people can say what they thought about. I'll give another 20, 30 seconds. Don't think too hard about this, okay? Keep it simple, keep it human. Okay, so hopefully you guys have a sentence or two, something in your mind. Does anyone want to share? No, come on, some brave soul. I love it, thank you. You?
She sat up straight in the sofa, surrounded by glittering things. An oriental vase, Persian busts of lovers on the wall, a book in her lap of Chinese art.
Nice. So we know that she cares about art, she cares about aesthetics. Very good. Anyone else?
I just have like just a couple lines.
Yeah,
And I wasn't alive in the 50s, so I'm kind of going by like watch my grandparents.
yeah.
So he sat down on the vinyl sofa, pulled off his cap and thought to himself, nothing smells as good as that TV dinner. What an amazing invention.
Oh my gosh, I love it, because at the time it was amazing,
It was like
right?
a huge thing, and that was their big, their TV trays.
The trays.
The foil, like grandma peel the foil back. And
Yeah.
my grandparents did, my other grandparents, were like, there's no way we live on a farm. I'm like, no way, it was so home ec. And so they're like
Right,
farm to table, and then the other ones that lived in in town.
Yeah.
They had the TV.
that's so, see, it's great, it's a human detail, and it's something that we don't think about at the time, that it was this great invention, and it saved people time. They sat around together in front of the TV and ate the dinner, like,
Pop in the oven, heat it up, put it on the TV tray, and the
Yes.
metal ones, the metal TV tray. not
Yes.
The weird.
Yes,
wood
yeah.
ones they have now, but had little lips so that.
and I remember the ones that they
fall off.
folded up, and then they sat in the corner, like,
Yeah,
behind
they
the
always
couch.
had to mess with the legs and they had to go a certain way.
Yep.
And they had a lip so that it wouldn't fall off on the floor. You have your
Yes.
cup and your glass of milk and your TV.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I remember, as a little kid.
Yeah.
I remember my grandparents loved the TV.
So, and then from your male perspective, I'm imagining he's the primary breadwinner in the house.
Right.
So he would be thinking about the things that he has in his house and the things that his job has bought him. And so that's a great example. So this just goes to show you, to thank you for sharing, both of you, that it's not about the things that you put in it. It's about what those things mean to your character. That is what we're looking for with world building. And you can extrapolate that to big scenes on ships and big epic, battles and whatever. The things that they notice are going to be personal to them. So the bottom line with that is that the reader is going to conjure a certain basic image. See if you can start there and then take off running with some more details that are specific to your character. All right, let's talk about crafting plot. The great thing about history is it's already there and written, and you can come up with some really wonderful plot points. So let history drive it. Great Depression, it's pretty easy to see what's going to stand in front of people. World War II, same thing. Once you do the research of the big picture items, the potential of things that are going to stand in your character's way and stumble them is kind of already written for you. So that's nice. It's a little bonus of historical fiction. You need to know what people of the time were facing, financial hardships, what the government restrictions were, what the laws were, what you could and could not do. In the Great Depression, there was a law against it, but they were not allowed to stand in the bread line. It was considered very offensive to men because a man's role is to provide for his family, and if a woman is standing in line, then that's reminding him of how he has failed, and that is culturally inappropriate at the time. So details like that, yeah.
I was wondering, is that where the term breadwinner comes from?
I don't know, but that's a great idea. Maybe, yeah. You need to think about the things that relate to your main character's goals, okay? That means if you're gonna have some natural disaster, ask yourself why. Like if you're writing about the Dust Bowl and you're gonna have this major scene with the Dust Bowl coming in, which I did in this book, but ask yourself why. Why am I putting that in? Is it because it was there at the time and I read about it and I have all this information? Maybe not the best reason to put it in, but if it is pushing your character away from their goal, then that is a great reason to put it in, okay? Consider rising action, as Mike mentioned earlier. You really want to slowly turn the corkscrew on your character. Little by little, every single scene, every single chapter, you're using the events of history and the world building and the setting to slowly push them to their limits and make them break. Every scene should have a goal, and every single scene should be slowly pushing your main character to change. Okay, Oops, did I go? There we go. Obviously, the goal of our books are to show emotional growth from start to finish. We want to start with Walter White and we want to end with Heisenberg. Anyone Breaking Bad? You want a completely different human at the end than you had in the beginning in some way, shape, or form. You want constant tension between the thing I want and the thing that stands in my way. That should be happening on some level throughout the majority of your story. Each roadblock that they hit creates grit and recommits your character to their purpose. And then bonds the reader with their inner selves of the reader again asking, what would I do in that situation? How do I feel about this? If you can get the reader subconsciously asking themselves these questions, that is what takes a book into a different experience. When you stop realizing you're reading, you start realizing that you are in this person's head. I don't know where I heard this quote, so I cannot attribute it. I wish that I could, but I love it. In every scene, find the hope in the despair in the hope. We should be having constant tension, okay? So even in the happy scenes, I want a hint of some struggle, I want a hint of something that's coming, I want a hint of some internal struggle. And then in the really awful, hard scenes, I need a little moment of hope. Give me a little something as the reader, so when I'm not just down in the dumps with the character. I'm still rooting for them because I know that there's a little touch of sunshine out there. Okay, theme. This is also one of my favorite little tips that I heard from some author somewhere, and listen to so many authors I can never remember who says what, but the theme is the thing that authors have to understand intimately but never actually talk about in the book, which is super fun. So the theme of free will versus destiny, that's just an easy one, identifiable. That's an example. So how characters interact with that theme is a form of internal movement. When we talk about adventure stories, we're not just talking about external movement, we're talking about internal. And so your theme is your universal question about life. And your protagonist spends the story in a quest to answer this theme. Now, this is the part that I love, and I have now incorporated into my my writing, is that each character that they have in their sphere has a different outlook on that same thing. That reinforces this big question that you are not talking about, but it is underneath the surface. It's creating a current, it's creating tension, and that is empathy. When you and I can have vastly different ideas about something, but it's the same basic question, that's where interesting conversations happen. And that really elevates your scenes. The reader will feel a movement towards the answer to that big question. You never have to talk about any of this. Just have it in your mind as you're writing, and naturally it's going to sort of be implanted in your scenes. I think it's important to remember that although I write some pretty high action stuff, the quiet moments with no movement can be absolutely loaded with tension and create a feeling of action and movement, all right? So when I talk about action, I really think of it as both internal and external. It's not purely just about big epic quests. It's about creating tension and movement, again, between the things that your character wants and things that they can't have. Probably the same thing. Want versus need. This has also been a game changer for me. Your want is your external tangible thing that your character wants, okay? The need is that deep internal desire to fulfill something. We talked about that when we were crafting character. Often your character in the beginning doesn't know the need. They just know, I want this thing. I want to be a incredible piano player, okay? That's their goal. But why? Their internal need is maybe because they don't have a family and they need a sense of place, whatever that thing is, okay? Now, at the halfway point, your character should start to see a shift between want and need. So this external want that they are fighting for have to become that piano player, the first half of the book. Slowly, this internal need starts brewing. And we know it as the reader. We know that we are reading this. The character does not see this yet. The character starts to realize that this is a bigger issue in my world than just wanting to be a piano player. And then they start to become more and more proactive in the second half of the book. They start to realize it's a need. This is a need that I have. And they start making active movements towards their goal with a very different perspective than they do in the beginning of the book. And that's a lot of that change that we see as someone going from, you know, the immediate, I want this, to the really emotional growth of, this is why I need this, and I need to be okay if I don't get it. That's a big emotional growth there. In my, the way I like to think of it is, by the time you hit the end of the book, I like the character to basically say something in their head, like, if I fail, I'm gonna fail on my terms. It's not the end of the world, it's not the end of me. Now they still might reach the goal, and that's okay, but their outlook on what it means to them should change through the second half of the book. Active protagonist, this is a big deal if you want to get traditionally published, okay? If you are indie published, or if you're writing more literary, this is not as important, okay? But if you're writing commercial and you want to be traditionally published, this is a big deal. You cannot just dump your protagonist in an awful situation and expect the reader to feel anything, okay? Like I said, if you're going to stick them in the Dust Bowl, unless we understand that character and we understand why the Dust Bowl is the worst thing in the world for that character, it won't mean a whole lot. So the books that I find to be passive tend to forget the external want and only focus on the need. We're authors, we love this stuff. We love to dig into like the meaning of things, right? So we come straight out of the gate talking to readers about this internal need that the character wants. That's far too evolved for our character. Our character needs to be a little bit more immediate, okay? We need an external one because we need to keep reading in that scene and be like, I wonder if they're gonna get it. I wonder if they're gonna get this thing that they want. That focus of watching them go through the steps to get that allows room for the emotion to come in naturally. Because when you're trying to talk about emotion, you know this, show versus tell, right? It's reading and writing 101. You have to leave space and room, okay, for them to feel those emotions. So focusing on that external goal really does leave room for that. The want that they have should be driving every choice, every scene, and should be like a heartbeat in the background of your story, okay? Really go back to those 5 pieces about crafting character. That tension pushes the story forward, and it creates a battle between your main character and their environment. So going back to terrible things cannot just be dumped on your character. It's not going to really elevate your story. You can use a little bit of it. A little bit kind of does help in historical fiction because there was a lot of awful stuff in history. So you'd be accurate if you use that. If you just dump trauma on them, they're not going to grow from that. Okay, they have to be wanting something so badly that big event is stopping them from getting it. Your character needs to drive the plot. Their misconception and their goal and their want should be driving every decision they make, and that should be driving that story narrative. So whether you're doing an epic quest or just day-to-day life of one person, you still need to keep them actively wanting something. So this is the opening to my book, Chasing Eleanor, and I'm using this because I think I went through 15 iterations of this before it actually got something publishable. So I worked very hard on the opening of this book. Okay, so like I said, 1935 event. Leaves fluttered as a sage rat scampered across the forest floor. City people called them squirrels. When he stopped, his long silvery tail curved like a question mark, and he twitched his cute button nose. I waited for the right moment, aimed for the head, and blasted his poor face to bits. Couldn't eat brains anyhow. So I wanted to give a feeling of survival, of acceptance for the situation that she does not want to be in. Why do we care that she's shooting a squirrel? Well, she has to feed her brothers, and they have no money. And so this is survival. This is her want, her external want is I have to feed my family. And this literary agent who, Donald Moss, he gives amazing, amazing classes. And he said this in one of the classes, is that whatever the one big thing is you need your readers to know, that's where you start your book. That's where you open it, is the one thing. And for this story to make sense, you have to know how far this girl is willing to go for her brothers, okay? And it's active. She's moving, she's doing something. So right away, you kind of learn something about her. All right, where does historical fiction go wrong? Well, we get a history lesson instead of a story. My publisher rejected my first book with, gave me a revise and resubmit with this exact feedback. It's like reading a history book. And so I said, okay, I'm going back and I'm totally revising it. And I really was growing a lot at the time as a writer. And so I ended up fixing it and signing with them for the full trilogy. Don't dump history facts. It's like, that's the worst thing you can do. We've all done it. I have done it. It's just natural, but dumping anything is not good. Okay. You want your details to stand out, but in the right way. Okay. If you were just taking, like there was one book I read where it was set in the 30s and they kept talking about the Petrola, and I'm like, okay, I get it. Like you found a historical word and you're putting it in, like it felt very, like it stuck out like just like a red light. If it would be Vitrola, it's like a record player type thing. Like yes, Vitrola, yeah.
And you put the record on and you wind it, has
Yes.
a big.
Yes, like the old megaphone looking thing, yeah. So you need your historical details to work for you and have a big impact, but not just because you think they're a cool idea or you found a historical fact that you think is really neat. And again, we all do this. Historical language that pulls the reader out. This is a hard one for me because you want to be historically accurate and sometimes you can't. The manuscript that I just finished is set in 17th century Venice, and the shift that women wore was called a camisia. And I had that in there because it's the only thing it was called, and every single reader said, I don't know what that is. And they assumed it was a sweater of some sort. And I was like, you have to say shift, even though nobody called it a shift. You have to make those hard choices of you're writing for a modern audience. Okay, you're writing a historical story, it's a modern audience. Language that doesn't match the time. The word okay did not come about until the 20th century. So being really careful about your word choice. I talked about dumping anything is not good. That includes backstory, setting, all that stuff. When in doubt, sprinkle. Sprinkle is the best thing you can do. Don't even use it in the opening. Just save it and then dabble it. Just little sprinkles. Everyone gets very upset when I say that I don't like backstory. I don't like flashbacks. I don't like all the stuff behind. Just keep me in the moment. I know it's a very controversial opinion, but I don't tend to love flashbacks because they tend to be info dumps on backstory. So try not to just dump information. Historical fiction, this is a big hot topic right now, harmful tropes, okay? We are a much different society now than we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So certain tropes can be very painful. The white savior trope, when we're talking about a Native American population and, colonization, something that I had to write about. So the white Europeans come in and they're going to save the savages, right? This was a common way of looking at things at the time. Very inappropriate and very hurtful for this time. So be very careful how you're writing that. Even if your character at the time was thinking, I'm going to save these people, that is very dangerous to put into a modern story. Diversity was always there. So if you're a white author and we're only writing white characters, think about it. Think about how accurate of a representation that was for the time. Making characters or caricatures of people, that's it's something we all do when we're first starting out writing. We've all done that, but it becomes easier to get back into it when you're writing historical fiction, because when you're writing like lords and ladies and stuff, it's like it's so easy to go back into these ideas of what their life was like, when really there's so many details, like scandalous details about them, that are going to be interesting for readers. Don't automatically go back into the character of what we know. And then what they call howlers or anachronisms, anything that's sitting there that shouldn't be. So in my trilogy, before I went through edits, I set in the 1600s and I mentioned something about the guillotine, and that wasn't going to be invented for another 100 years. So I had to take that out. So, no matter how much research you do, there's going to be errors. You just have to accept it. Same with any genre, right? Like you can research of one side down the other, it's still gonna find its way in there. So we're not perfect. All right, so shades of subtlety. Restraint is everything. There's so much in what we don't say. Let me give you a couple of examples of openings in a second. Again, in that Donald Moss class, one of my favorite tips that he gave is that after a big moment, if there's a big reveal, the husband walks in and says, "I'm leaving you." The next beat should not be anything. The next beat should not be dialogue, shouldn't be interiority, that give that character something benign to do, like stir their tea and stare. Because you want to give space for the reader to feel that big moment. The less that you kind of pile on the reader and the more you just sort of draw out those big moments, the more the reader has time to really sit in it and react and feel it. Giving your reader space, again, not dumping all the information you can in the opening page, that's a big deal. But the same goes for, Irene and Mike have both helped me over the years with editing. And I think that's what Irene's big thing was like, she was like, you need to just slow down and, have a little restraint. Because I want to put everything in and I get really excited about it. So it really is a practice to learn how to do these things. Again, like don't say emotions, these are all kind of basic things. Don't immerse me with more setting, but give me specific details. And again, you want the reader to wonder, what would I do? These World War II stories just wreck me because I'm like, what would I do? I don't know what I would do. But we go through the process of change in a safe way from our couch, reading about other people doing it. That's the science of reading. That's why we read, okay? Now let's go back to why I personally write historical fiction. We're gonna use the same principles that we just talked about for character work. I am an award-winning historical fiction author. It's my identity. What I want to celebrate women's contributions to the world. It's my external goal. My internal goal is so that women are not forgotten. Because in history books, they happen. What stands in my way? Well, the terrible roller coaster of publishing. Access to even meeting agents or getting your work read. As we all know, it's terrible. My own insecurities and imposter syndrome. Money, time, I have a full-time job that I have to do on top of writing. I'm doing a lifelong pursuit of a craft that I will never master. And there's lots of mean people out there. Pretty active on social media, and I'll tell you, I never want to go viral ever again because it's the worst thing in the world. You become a target to be abused, and it's not fun. But the bigger you get, the more people will abuse you, and that is the hard truth of it. So these are all the things that stand in my way for me meeting my goals and reaching my dreams. And then what's my misbelief? My cheeky answer when everyone asks me like, why do you write historical fiction, is because I can't time travel. My cheeky answer. I use that in interviews and podcasts. The real true answer, the more interesting answer, is that I feel like I can fix my own feelings of feeling invisible growing up. It's a much more interesting answer, don't you think? It tells a little more why I am obsessed with reading about women in history and writing books in history. So we have a few minutes. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples. This is the fun part. I get to show you my favorite books and why I love them. Okay. I can't even tell you how much I love her. I could go on about her for hours, but The Nightingale is one of those books for me that, one of the few books that really changed me. I mean, I stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning reading it, like through tears, and just was so transformative for me. This opening line is part of what did it for me. The second I heard this, I was in it. I was like, I don't even care what you write, I'm in it, give it to me. The opening line is, if I have learned anything in this long life of mine, it is this. In love, we find out who we want to be. In war, we find out who we are. Now, how powerful is that, right? It tells you right there, it's going to be an epic war story. It tells you that this is an older woman looking back on her life and talking about the things that she's learned and the impossible things that she's gone through in one sentence, right? We already know so much about this woman. And it's an incredible book if you haven't read it. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Has anyone read that? It's one of my favorite books. I absolutely adore it. And it is the story, well, I'll tell you what it's about after I read this opening paragraph. The girl wakes up in someone else's bed. She lies there perfectly still, tries to hold time like a breath in her chest, as if she can keep the clock from ticking forward, keep the boy beside her from waking, keep the memory of their night alive through sheer force of will. She knows, of course, that she can't, knows that he'll forget. They always do. This book is about a woman who cannot die. And the curse is that as soon as she leaves their presence, they forget her. She is the forgettable woman who cannot die. It's an incredible idea for a story. And you think about the pain of living for 300 years, being forgettable, and you fall in love with people who don't remember you when you leave the room. I mean, it's so heartbreaking, and I feel like she encapsulates it right there in the pinnacle of what it would be like to be forgotten, right? Almost done. The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. This was one of those books where the plot was a little slow and the story wasn't elaborate. The writing was so stellar that I was blown away. And this is the opening of this book. Lucrezia is taking her seat at the long dining table, which is polished to a watery gleam and spread with dishes, inverted cups, a woven circlet of fur. Her husband is sitting down, not in his customary place at the opposite end, but next to her, close enough that she could rest her head on his shoulder, should she wish. He is unfolding his napkin and straightening a knife and moving the candle toward them, both when it comes to her, with a peculiar clarity, as if some colored glass has been put in front of her eyes, or perhaps removed from them, that he intends to kill her. That's the opening. The opening paragraph. Like, I'm in it. I want to know what happens. Like, you got me. And it's a true story of one of the Medici women. And so she's setting this full scene, but it's purely because this woman is sitting at a dining table feeling like my husband's planning to kill me. So she's trying to focus on the cups and the fur and how close he is. So every bit of this scene is working double time for her. And then last one is This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger. Beautiful, beautiful book. Haven't read it. Again, I highly recommend all of these. How great is this opening line? Albert named the rat. He called it Faria. It was an old creature, a model of gray and white fur. Almost always, it kept to the edges of the tiny cell, scurrying along the wall to a corner where I'd put a few crumbs of the hard biscuit that had been my meal. At night, I generally couldn't see it, but could still hear the soft rustle as it moved from the wide crack between the corner blocks, across the straw on the floor, grabbed the crumbs and returned the way it had come. Whenever the moon was just right and bright beams streamed through the high, narrow slit that was the only window, illuminating the stones of the eastern wall, I was sometimes able to glimpse in the reflected light the slender oval of Faria's body. Its fur, a dim silver blur, its thin tail roping behind like an afterthought of the animal's creation. This is a very emotional book, you can tell right away. We're talking about a little boy sitting in a cell who's made friends with the rat. That's powerful. I was like, you named the rat. I'm in it. I'm done the whole time. Like, you have me. The thing I love about this is there is a sense of hope. He's talking about the crack of light. He's talking about making friends with a rat who's eating his dinner. This is a horrible, sad opening with a whole lot of light at the end. And that made me as a reader feel like I could trust the author. He's going to show me an empowering story. This is not going to break me down. I thought that was very, very powerful. And it's very Huck Finn, this story. So also a great depression story. These are some of my favorite craft books. If you're interested, and I talked about Donald Moss, emotional craft of fiction is by far my favorite. I use it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. My pages are worn this time. Intuitive editing also is really wonderful for revisions and editing. And if you'd like to connect with me, I'm at Kerry Writes across the board. My website and my socials are all Kerry Writes. And I love connecting with people online. And thank you very much for having me.
Got through her Q&A.
Oh, right, Q&A, sorry. Any questions? Shoot.
I have several, I just have to point for it.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on if you are on including real people?
Yes.
I have a project I'm working on that includes a few really interesting women
Mhm.
from around the turn of the century that are kind of side characters.
Yes.
Teach my character something, but I am making them very surprisingly different from what would be expected from their biography. So
Okay.
what, like their personalities, what are your thoughts on that?
Is that because it serves the story? Okay, your friend is the author's note. You can make any changes you want, but if you are going against the historical record, you need to make a note somewhere in your author's note that said, I changed this in it because it served the plot. Done. Most historical fiction that I read has some kind of reference to a real person. Galileo makes a very small appearance in my next manuscript. And so it's very common to have real people. Chasing Eleanor is called that because she's literally chasing Eleanor Roosevelt across the country. And I wrote scenes with Eleanor, who was my lifelong idol. She was my favorite historical figure. So I really wanted to do her justice. Yet I still had to, no matter how much I read about her over the decades of my life, I still had to conjure up an idea of what she would sound like and how she would move. And so a little bit of that is just going to be from you anyways. But if you are really going against the grain from what you know from the historical record, you probably want to make a note about it. Otherwise, you're going to have some unhappy readers.
It's more like inserting personality.
Well, that's okay. I mean, but it depends. If you're talking about Winston Churchill and you're talking about him serving tea with a smile, like that's not going to fly with readers, right? So if it's an obscure figure, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you're going against something that is really well documented, then you just want to mention it. And you can do that. You have a creative license to do that. Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer.
There you go. Right? Yes.
First, I would like to say, I have kind of made it a point of taking lots of both in-person and online classes in the past year and a half, going to workshops, etc. I think your presentation was one of the best I've seen.
Oh.
And I'm gonna be.
That's so fine. Thank you.
Because I'm gonna be able to reference them, and that's really important.
Thank
So
you.
for that. My next question is, you said, well, I have three, sorry.
Go ahead.
You have indie published and you have traditionally published. Did you start indie and then make a name for yourself and then become known from that? Because one of the things that I have learned recently is that if you indie publish and then you don't sell 5,000 books,
Yeah.
no one is ever gonna look at you. So I would just like your experience with the two.
Yeah.
And the next follow-up to that would be, you have awards. And I was told that awards now you have to buy. Essentially that you pay to enter contests to get the award. So could you tell us about that too?
Yes. Okay. So the first part, I did 2 indie books first, mostly because I couldn't even envision writing a query letter, or it was so not ready for that. So I indie published 2 books first, and I didn't know what I was doing as far as marketing goes. I just barely kind of dipped my toes in the water. And then I ended up signing with a publisher having nothing to do with my indie books. The truth is, I have friends that have signed with huge publishers with 0 following and 0 published books and 0 awards. I don't think that there are set rules on all that. Now, if you are a Colleen Hoover and you hit it huge, then yeah, they're gonna go to you and they're gonna say, hey, you've sold however many copies we want, because Colleen Hoover started indie, right? 50 Shades of Grey, that author was writing books in her basement, writing dirty books in her basement. And now, I mean, she ended up being huge. So those are the unicorn stories. My advice is, don't let any supposed rules of publishing stop you from doing what is right for you. Because sometimes projects, Mike and I were talking about this earlier, sometimes projects are really inventive and unique and are not going to find a home in traditional publishing. You might need to go indie to keep you the vision that you're looking for. But thinking about trying to set up a platform and trying to build to the next thing, I would say keep that secondary to just focusing on your project and what you feel is the right move for you. I will tell you, I don't envision myself going back indie now because I just don't really love the stress of doing all of it myself. I like having a publisher who manages all the formatting and all the everything and marketing and that kind of thing. After that, the awards, yes, you do have to pay to enter. That is true. But it's not a ton of money. And then sometimes publishers will pay for it. And if you're indie, then you pay for it. Was that all of them or was there a missed one? Okay. Yeah.
I'll ask her one question, because it's the same line. I was told by someone sometime that if you don't have more than, excuse me, more than one book in you, publishers don't want you. They want a writer who can keep giving them books.
I think across the board, that's probably accurate. I really think that part of the reason I was able to sign with the publisher for my first book is because I pitched it as a trilogy. But again, I can't even tell you how many author friends I have who have signed off of their first debut book and had no idea what they were going to write next. It is a part of the conversation. I've been in pitch sessions where they will ask you, what are you working on now? It's a pretty common question after you pitch them your current book. And it's okay if you don't have an answer. It's okay if you say, nope, I'm not on my next project yet. I guess my advice is forget the rules, honestly, because the second you have an interesting book or a book that a publisher thinks I could sell, it's all out the window. They want that book. And it doesn't really matter what brought that book to them. It doesn't matter if it's your debut or your 15th.
I would say that anytime anybody tells you an absolute, don't listen to them. Except for that, what I just said.
Yes.
I was wondering what your thoughts are about writing historical fiction about a real person who's not famous, but is like someone in your family or someone you know well, especially if other people might have different opinions about that person's life.
Yeah.
It's like, they're a real person, but no one outside of your family or friends.
Right. I would say that's a common debate even outside of historical fiction. A lot of people pull from their family. And the good rule of thumb is to change details about the person. Not to make it a, carbon copy of the person that you knew. Changing their name, their occupation, pieces of their personality so that it's not slander is kind of important. Even if it's only going to affect your family. No book is worth alienating your family, in my opinion. Now, if there was a story you feel is really, really important to tell, you can make that judgment call for yourself. But a general rule of thumb is to change details so that it's not slander. Yeah.
Kind of in the same vein, my one historical fiction subject that has in mind has to do with my great aunt and City Bull. And her external goal was, I'm going to convert all of the Lakota and Dakota to Christianity.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
How do you deal with that without doing the white savior thing, without getting into caricatures of those people at the time? They seem ridiculous today.
Yeah.
But she was real back then.
Yes.
So she's not the heroine.
Okay, I was just gonna say, make her not the protagonist. That's step one. You can have those characters in there, but you don't want to be asking your reader to gain empathy for someone who is actively causing harm to someone. That puts the reader in an uncomfortable position to try to determine, is this something the author believes in, or is this just part of the story? It's a landmine for issues. So one of my issues in historical fiction, I will not use slurs. I don't care how historically accurate they are, I'm not gonna do it. And it is hard for some people because they're like, well, it's not historically accurate. I'm like, I don't care. Because again, I'm writing for the modern reader, and I have never read a scene with a racial slur that is stronger ever. I just don't think it builds to that. So you can have characters be doing these things, and you can even have like a main character, just not your protagonist, not the one that we are in that POV and we're rooting for that person, because it just creates kind of some difficult tension. But if it's not the main character, I think it opens you up a lot to be able to talk about that. And you can even have your main character reflect on how it makes them uncomfortable, or you can slip in ways that will meet our modern sensibilities.
Her on the one side and the chief on the other side.
Mhm.
Is that doable, keeping her one of two main characters and showing the investigation?
I think you could, yeah, for sure. You just have to handle it with care, and I would suggest getting a sensitivity reader if you can for that kind of situation. But you know, we have to be conscious and aware of the things that we're writing, but also you're still the author and it's still your story. So you have to feel good about what you're writing. Yeah.
This is a question actually from someone else.
Yay.
Any special ideas on how to treat a present day time traveler going back to historical time?
Okay.
To repeat the question, so the.
Yeah.
Yes, so how would you treat a modern day time traveler that goes back to historical times? So watch the Outlander series. Honestly, Diana Gabaldon, the queen, and does it about as good as it gets. So I think that a lot of it would come down to the fact of we're a completely different society than whatever it is you're going to. So there would be some internal battle with our current character being plopped into, name your time period. So really focusing on the question of why are you writing that character and why are you setting them back in time? What's the story you're trying to tell? What's the bigger life lesson? What's the bigger worldview that you have that you're trying to tell in that story? And that will help direct you with how the character reacts when they get back to history, I would say. But I haven't done any time traveler stuff, so I'm not an expert on it. Yeah.
When you're doing your research and you're going back and trying to find all this information, do you have like sources you go to or like a method that you use to do all that research?
Yeah, my method is madness. Research is ongoing. It's just not like you do it for a month or two before you write, and then it's nonstop. I mean, there's tabs after tabs after tabs, and I'm going back and forth. So what I tend to do is I tend to start a Google Drive folder, and I just click the links in there, and I organize it by different details. Like, a lot of times I move a lot of my stories, so maybe I'll organize it by place. These are all my Canada resources, and these are all my Paris resources. But what's interesting, I find I don't have to go back to those resources a lot. Because again, we're talking about really small, specific details. You mostly remember them. You really only have to go back when it's some obscure reference that you're like, they do that again, or what do they call that thing again? It's, for the most part, I feel like you take in the research for something's gonna jump out at you off the page, and you go, okay, that's super interesting. I want to do that, and that kind of sticks with you, and you can sprinkle that into the book. So a lot of the big picture research you're not going to put in your book. It's just for your own knowledge as you're crafting. Although I did just buy, Scrivener. I did just buy Scrivener for that reason. Apparently you can organize your research. I will update you later how that goes. Yeah.
I'm just curious, you're talking about memoirs being helpful.
Yeah.
If memoirs are in a different language, say it was in French,
Yeah.
in my case, it might be early Mexican. Do you know of any resources of how you, a way to get it translated?
I do not. I know that documents online, you can translate them. There's actually, I didn't know this until I started doing this. Up in the search bar, frequently there is a little book that you can click and it'll click to English or French or whatever you're going to. But full memoirs, no, unless it's just, there's some rare printing, that it happens to be in English at some point. Otherwise, hopefully find someone who reads the language and can translate it for you. But yeah, that's a good question.
Read it into your translation on your phone. A lot
I
of
know.
phones have the translation.
Yes, yeah,
And I had a friend who went to France and she would read she'd write down what she
Yeah.
needed, and then she'd show the waiter or and it would translate to French, so they could read what she would like write it down, or she'd say it into her memo, and then it would.
well, I'll tell you,
Yeah, so unless there's like this, I don't know, it'd take a long time to read this book out loud to do it, but.
in researching the colonial Canada side of my story, so hard because Quebec was settled 400 years ago, and they've stayed French, right? They still speak French, such a huge part of their culture. They actually say that the modern language is very closely related to the old French. So Parisian French is the modern French. So even modern, so my mother-in-law speaks French, and I would go to her and be like, what does this mean? She'd be like, I don't know. It's old French, I don't know. So you do the best you can. And again, we are not historians, right? So you do what you can, and then you cut your losses at some point, because it's my great sadness that I never learned French in life. So I always wanted to learn another language, just never did. Don't have it in me, so yeah.
Go to the university and find someone.
I was thinking of university.
Which and pay them to translate.
Yeah.
That's as far as I can think of. The question for you is kind of on and off. You made some comments about language. That you should use in today's modern stories that were popular at the time. Right now, I'm going to reference slavery.
Yeah.
And that era. What are your thoughts on using period language as long as it is not a serious critical slur?
Yeah.
Using current language in a nonfiction academic research volume that uses modern language, when the entire volume is set in that period.
I don't write nonfiction at all, so I don't think I can speak to that. But I will say that the choice to not use racial slurs in my writing, or slurs of any kind, is truly that, it's a choice. I know plenty of historical fiction authors that will use it, but generally you don't want your protagonist using it, and you only need to say it once, because the reader will feel it pretty heavily. So you can make your own judgment calls on that. If there are times that it might be appropriate. I spent several years writing young adult, and it's just can't do that in young adult at all whatsoever. And so I think I just got very sensitive to that whole trying to choose language very carefully. But you can do it and still not be horribly offensive.
Well, the instance is a former colleague of mine and his friend were writing an academic research nonfiction history biography of Lincoln's secretary.
Right.
Jennifer Nicolay. They asked me to edit it. I did so. And the only thing where I disputed them was they were using the term African American.
Yeah.
For slaves.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, I understand the times, and I understand that you don't have to use certain words to identify these people.
Yeah.
They were slaves, they were chattel, they were, whatever. But to use African American just stopped me in my.
Because it's a modern term. Yes. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not suggesting anybody ever use a slur.
Right.
Ethnic, racial.
There are other words you can use that, yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I agree with you on that, because that is, that's modern terminology.
And it's not something that's going to be on the shelves. It's going to be in the university libraries or in libraries for historical research.
And again, get the author's note as your friend. You can always make a note that says, we chose this language for this reason, and we recognize that can be triggering for some. You have to just, That's the thing about historical fiction, is that I don't believe in sugarcoating it, right? My stuff's pretty gritty. And that's part of the reason I choose not to do some of the offensive language, because I'm taking my readers to some pretty dark places anyways. Like, I want my readers to be emotionally invested, but not hurt, you know?
So question for you in your writing process, a lot of people you'll ask them to be like, are you a model or a pantser?
Yeah.
Where do you find you fall in that?
I'm about as far as you can get into the pantser world.
Really?
Yes, I can't plot to save my life. It makes revisions terrible, but in my opinion, all of my stories, that's where the magic happens. These moments come about that you go, oh yeah, it's good. And I couldn't have come up with it if I was plotting. I will say those 5 pieces of character, that's new for me. I'm doing that now because I have rewritten entire books before. Chasing Eleanor, I hit 87,000 words, and it was nothing is what I wanted, and so I threw it in the trash. All 87,000 words. I started over. I never want to do that again. So the few pieces that I can put in place ahead of time, and then I have a friend who taught me how to do a 7-point story arc, where you're really just going opening, ending, midpoint, and then maybe 1 or 2 pinch points. And so very, very loose, and then you just free write. I do a lot of free writing and erase a lot. Mike, actually, I quote him all the time. People ask what's the best writing advice you ever got, and I always quote you. You said that no writing is ever wasted. And I think of it all the time, because sometimes I do a lot of erasing, a lot of backspace in my world. But that's okay, because I'm exploring and it's not wasted. It's exploration. And I'm okay with that. But for the most part, yeah, I see it in my pants all the way.
So if I can ask a follow-up on that one, so when you're doing your writing, where does your research fall within that process?
I like to research for 1 to 2 months before I even start crafting a story. I started already researching this morning for my next project, and I have zero idea what my character looks like, sounds like, no name, anything. I just envision her. So I like to do just big picture stuff. I don't take any notes. I just get a feel for what that world is. And then this is also a little bit controversial. I write my rough draft without looking at resources, because I want my story to be about the human, and the historical details can come later. So that's my process.
How many books a year do you read in your genre?
Well, let's see. In my genre, probably around 50 to 60. I read about 70 to 80 total. But I'm also constantly doing beta reads and advanced copies and critique partner swaps. I've got 2 sitting at home that I need to get to. So, but just pure historical fiction reads 50 to 60. Yeah. And then I read outside of my genre as well. It's interesting. Historical fiction takes me there. It just emotionally takes me to a place that I can't read as a writer. It's just pure enjoyment for me, and I get caught up in it. Reading other genres allows me to read it as an author and pick it apart and see what works and what doesn't. So it's important, I think, to read outside your genre as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thank you very much, Kerry, and thank you all for coming, and thank you all at home for coming. Once again, those of us that are here are gonna party and eat snacks and mingle and talk. And if you guys have questions for Kerry, she'll hopefully stick around for a little bit. Talk with your fellow writers, and we'll see you here next month for Shelby's Little. All right, thanks.
I'm getting.
Okay. Bummer. I'd like to
Yeah, they were good. We were doing the weekly review.